December 22nd, 1919. A telegram arrives in Paris. Boy Capel, the great love of Coco Chanel's life, has been killed instantly in a car crash. The world fully expected this budding fashion designer to be utterly crushed by the news. But shortly after, a figure appeared on the streets of Paris who turned every head. In an era when women adorned themselves exclusively in vibrant, colorful garments, Chanel wore black, day after day. This armor of black was her mourning gown for a love lost, but it was also a shield forged from her inner strength. Onlookers saw a rebel, an act of defiance. Chanel, however, saw a new possibility. No one knew it at the time, but this profound personal grief was the seed, the very first inspiration for a creation that would soon upend the world of fashion, the little black dress. It would no longer be a symbol of mourning, but a declaration of independence and elegance for the modern woman. From an orphan in a convent to the queen of fashion, from a kept mistress to the creator of a business empire, Chanel's life is a testament to a powerful truth. True strength isn't about forgetting sorrow, but about forging it into a weapon that can change the world. Welcome to Fanko Decodes. I'm Fanko, your guide to decoding the wisdom of legends. Today, we're decoding Coco Chanel, one of the most controversial and influential women of the 20th century. Her origins were humble. Abandoned by her father at a convent at age 12. She had a string of lovers but never married. She shattered tradition, liberating women from the corset. She built an empire, making Chanel a symbol of timeless style. But what few people understand is that Chanel's success was no accident. It was the result of a complete and brilliant philosophy, a masterclass in calculated rebellion. Her strategy was not to fight against the world, but to make the world come to her. Through her incredible true story, we will decode the secrets to her success. A core mindset, the law of attraction. Always position yourself in the center of possibility, not by chasing opportunities, but by making them come to you. 3 key practices. 1. Mirroring, the power of creating instant rapport. 2. Anticipating the zeitgeist, staying half a step ahead of the curve. 3. Embodying emotion, translating feelings into tangible, iconic forms. This isn't just the story of Chanel. It's a survival guide for anyone who wants to live an authentic life. In an age where everyone wants to be unique, why do some become fleeting influencers while others become legends? The answer is encoded in the life of Chanel. Chapter 1. The Wild Rose of the Convent. August 19, 1883. In the charity hospital of Saumur, a small town in France, the cry of a baby girl broke the silence. No one could have known that this illegitimate child would one day revolutionize the entire world of fashion. Her name was Gabrielle Chanel. Her father was an itinerant street vendor, her mother a laundrywoman. In the rigid, class-obsessed society of 19th century France, a birth like this was a life sentence to the bottom rungs of society. But fate had an even crueler hand to play. In 1895, 12-year-old Gabrielle was helping her father sell goods at a market. Suddenly, her father, Albert Chanel, approached her, his face grim. "Gabrielle, come with me." The little girl assumed they were moving again. They had moved countless times over the years. But this time was different. The carriage stopped before the imposing gates of the WWII convent. "Papa, why are we here?" Albert didn't answer. He simply unloaded her and her 2 sisters' belongings, turned to a nod, and said, "Please take care of them." "Papa, where are you going?" Gabrielle cried, running after the carriage, but her father never once looked back. From that moment on, Gabrielle Chanel was an orphan, an unclaimed child. Life at the WWII convent was Spartan, austere, and governed by rigid rules. Yet it was this seemingly barren soil that became the cradle of Chanel's aesthetic philosophy. Here, there were no vibrant colors, only the stark contrast of black and white. There were no elaborate decorations, only clean, simple lines. The chains from which the nuns hung their keys, the crisp black and white habits they wore, these elements, absorbed day after day, subconsciously forged the design DNA she would later use to conquer the world. She learned to sew at the convent, but more importantly, she learned to be a keen observer of human nature in an environment of extreme repression. She discovered that true elegance didn't come from wealth, but from an inner posture and an obsessive attention to detail. She understood that creating uniqueness within the rules was a far more potent strategy than overt rebellion. At 18, Gabrielle left the place that had shaped her aesthetic and imprisoned her youth. She chose not to marry, instead taking a job as a seamstress's apprentice in the town of Moulins, singing in a cafe at night for extra money. It was here that she made the first, and perhaps most important, decision of her life. She would bury the abandoned girl named Gabrielle. She gave herself a stage name, Coco. The story goes it came from a song she often sang. But more profoundly, Coco was her first act of self-creation. While other singers wore frilly, elaborate dresses, Coco took to the stage in simple frocks and plain hats that she had sewn herself. Her goal wasn't to please. It was to be remembered. The identity of Coco was her first masterpiece and the first public demonstration of her philosophy of strategic uniqueness. On the cafe stage, Coco experienced the feeling of being watched for the first time, not for her singing voice, which was average at best, but for her distinct and different style. When other female performers were in their poofy skirts and extravagant hats, Coco chose a simple black dress, crowned only by a plain straw hat she had made. "Why do you dress so plainly?" the other girls would ask. "Because simplicity is easier to remember," Coco replied. She didn't know it yet, but this simple idea would become the core philosophy of the Chanel brand. Even more crucially, in the cafe, Coco mastered a vital skill, how to quickly identify people of value in a crowd, and more importantly, how to make them approach her. One evening in 1905, a young officer walked into the cafe. He wore a crisp uniform. His bearing was elegant. He was clearly from the aristocracy. When Coco finished her song and stepped off the stage, the officer approached her directly. "Mademoiselle, your performance was wonderful. I am Etienne Balsan." This encounter would change Coco's destiny. Balsan was the wealthy heir to a textile fortune and a notorious playboy. He was captivated by Coco's unique aura. "Would you be my guest at my chateau?" Balsan invited. At that moment, 21-year-old Coco made one of the most pivotal decisions of her life. She would leave Moulins and see the wider world. But she had no idea that her real education was just beginning. Within the walls of Balsan's castle, she would learn to navigate the world of the elite, and she would discover her true calling. Most importantly, she would begin to put into practice the philosophy that had taken root in the convent, how to remain utterly yourself, and in doing so, make the entire world fall at your feet. Chapter 2. The Education of a Maverick. 1906. The Château de Royal-Leu. This ancient castle in the French countryside belonged to Etienne Balsan, surrounded by sprawling vineyards and oak forests. For Coco, who had come from the austere world of the convent, it was like stepping into a fairy tale. But reality quickly delivered a harsh lesson. At her first formal dinner party at the chateau, Chanel felt the brutal sting of social reality. The dress she had so carefully chosen, in the company of aristocratic women encased in elaborate silks and suffocating corsets, looked painfully out of place. "I thought she was the new maid," a woman whispered, the sound light as a feather but sharp as a needle. The suppressed laughter that rippled through the dining room was a humiliation unlike any she had ever felt. She didn't fight back. In that instant, she understood a profound truth. In a world that defines value by wealth and bloodline, words are useless. You can never argue someone into respecting you. You can only act. You must build a version of yourself they simply cannot ignore. This experience taught Coco a vital lesson. True power isn't about fitting in. It's about holding your ground and making others see the value in what you represent. During her days at the chateau, Coco began what she might have called her social laboratory. She meticulously observed every guest, how they spoke, how they socialized, how they navigated the intricate web of aristocratic relationships. But she didn't just mimic them. She observed in order to find her own unique position. The chateau often hosted equestrian events. Traditionally, ladies would ride side saddle, dressed in cumbersome, voluminous riding skirts and large hats. It was an elegant but utterly impractical affair. Coco chose a radically different approach. She borrowed a man's shirt from Belson, paired it with trousers she tailored herself, and threw on a simple jacket. On her head, she wore a plain, unadorned hat she had crafted. The first time she appeared in this outfit, the entire riding party was scandalized. "My God, she's wearing men's clothes," one lady exclaimed. "How improper," whispered another. But when the ride began, something remarkable happened. The women in their traditional riding habits could only trail carefully behind the men, but Coco, unburdened, could control her horse with ease, keeping pace with the most experienced male riders. More importantly, she looked confident, free, as if her attire was the most natural choice in the world. At first, the men were skeptical of this anomaly, but they soon discovered that riding with Coco was a completely different experience. She didn't require them to slow down, didn't need their careful assistance, and never complained about a splash of mud on her clothes. "Coco, you ride magnificently." A young viscount genuinely praised her. "Why can't the other ladies be more like you?" a count asked. Coco smiled and replied, "Because they are told how they should be. I choose what is most practical." That statement resonated with the men. They began to respect her, not for her words, but for the freedom, vitality, and fearlessness she embodied. She hadn't tried to blend into their world. She had created her own, more compelling one. In that moment, Chanel found her first weapon, redefining elegance through disruptive comfort and utility. Within Balson's circle, Coco began to carve out her own space. Not as an appendage to a powerful man, but as an independent, fascinating individual in her own right. But the most significant turning point came in 1909. That summer, Balson invited a special guest, Arthur Boy Capel, the son of a British coal magnate. He was young, handsome, wealthy, and refreshingly open-minded. The first time Boy saw Coco, she was in the garden, pruning roses. She wore a simple white dress, her hair tied back in a practical ponytail, completely absorbed in her task. "Who is she?" Boy asked Balson. "That's Coco, a very special girl." Boy walked into the garden. "Good afternoon, mademoiselle. What are you doing?" Coco looked up and saw for the first time the man who would change her life. "I'm pruning the roses," she said. "Wild roses are beautiful, but they need to be trimmed properly to produce the most magnificent blooms." Boy was struck by her answer. Of all the women he had ever met, none could weave philosophy so effortlessly into a simple, everyday act. "And do you think people need pruning as well?" he asked. "Of course," Coco replied, looking directly into his eyes. "We need to prune away all the parts of ourselves that aren't authentic so that our inner beauty can truly blossom." They talked for hours that afternoon in the garden. Boy discovered that Coco was not just beautiful. She possessed an independent mind and a unique perspective on the world. A few months later, Coco made another life-altering decision. She would leave Balson and go to Paris with Boy. "Why?" Balson asked, confused. "You have everything you could want here." "Because comfort is the enemy of ambition," Coco replied. "I don't want to be someone's ornament. I want to be myself." In 1910, 27-year-old Coco Chanel, armed with all the wisdom and experience she had gained at the chateau, boarded a train to Paris. She didn't know that she was about to launch her own era in the fashion capital of the world. But she knew one thing for certain. She had learned how to remain true to herself while making others willingly accept, support, and even follow her. This would be her greatest weapon in the conquest of Paris. Chapter 3. Ambition and Love in Paris. 1910, 21 Rue Cambon, Paris. A small hat shop quietly opened its doors, a simple sign hanging above, Chanel Modes. No one passing by could have imagined that this unassuming little shop would one day become the epicenter of a global fashion revolution. The owner was 27-year-old Coco Chanel. She had used money loaned to her boy cable to lease the tiny space. Inside, there were only 3 hats on display, a simple straw boater, a black velvet cap, and a white hat with a single silk ribbon. No feathers, no flowers, no fussy decorations, the complete antithesis of the elaborate millinery that was fashionable in Paris at the time. Her first customer was a middle-aged aristocrat who entered out of curiosity. "These hats, they are so simple," she said, puzzled. "Because true beauty needs no embellishment," Coco answered with a calm smile. The woman picked up the straw hat, put it on, and looked in the mirror. It was extraordinary. Without the distraction of complex ornaments, the lines of her face appeared sharper, her entire bearing more elegant. "I'll take it," she said without hesitation. This was the first hat Coco ever sold. It was the first foundation stone of her empire. That first sale was a good start, but in the rigidly hierarchical world of Parisian fashion, Chanel and her modest shop were a mere drop in the ocean. A prominent fashion critic of the time wrote a scathing review, declaring, "Mademoiselle Chanel clearly does not understand Parisian chic. Her minimalist style was dismissed as plain, even impoverished." Faced with this public criticism, Chanel did not change her designs to suit the market, nor did she engage in a war of words with her critics. She understood that to conquer Paris, you don't persuade, you lead. She needed to create a tipping point, a moment that would transform her style from an oddity into a desirable trend. She turned her gaze to the epicenter of Parisian culture and trend-setting, the theater. Instead of buying expensive advertisements, she devised a strategy that was nothing short of genius for its time. She approached one of Paris's most celebrated actresses, Gabrielle Dorziat, and persuaded her to wear a Chanel-designed hat for the entirety of her performance in a new hit play. Chanel understood a timeless truth. Fashion trends are not born in design studios. They are defined by the idols who live in the spotlight, under the focused gaze of the public. When the curtain rose, a miracle happened. On a stage filled with ornate sets and extravagant costumes, the simple, unadorned straw hat on the lead actress's head acted like a spotlight, instantly capturing everyone's attention. It wasn't swallowed by the background. Its radical simplicity made the actress look fresh, modern, and utterly captivating. After the performance, all of high society was asking the same question: where did she get that hat? Overnight, Chanel's hat shop went from being ignored to being the most talked about fashion destination in Paris. This textbook success cemented Chanel's understanding of her third key practice, embodying emotion. But she wasn't just embodying her own personal sorrow anymore. She was embodying the unspoken emotions of an entire era. She realized people weren't just buying her hats because they were pretty. They were buying what the hats represented: a deep, unspoken desire to break free from constraint, to return to simplicity, to embrace a spirit of fresh, unburdened freedom. From that moment on, Chanel was no longer just a milliner. She became a translator of the times. Every design she created was a love letter to the era. The little black dress was a farewell to the old world. The jersey knit suit was a cry for the liberation of the female body, and years later, the 2.55 handbag would be a declaration of a woman's freedom to use her hands to control her own destiny. As her fame grew, Coco expanded her business. In 1913, she opened a second boutique in the seaside resort town of Deauville, catering to the wealthy on holiday. Deauville was the playground of European aristocrats and industrialists. Traditionally, women would stroll the boardwalks in corseted dresses and enormous hats, terrified of the sun. Coco introduced a series of revolutionary designs, simple, comfortable dresses made from jersey knit fabric with no corsets, perfect for seaside activities. These clothes are too simple. They look like underwear, some traditional ladies complained. But younger women were instantly drawn to them. Wearing Coco's designs, they could walk freely, swim, even play sports without being prisoners of their clothes. Adding to the allure, Boy Capel was a frequent visitor to Deauville. When the locals saw the couple together, they were struck by their effortless harmony. Boy, dressed in a simple white shirt and khaki trousers, walking alongside Coco in one of her own knit dresses, their image on the beach became the picture of modern elegance. "They look so perfectly matched," wrote the wife of a British diplomat in a letter to her friend, "not because of their finery, but because of their simplicity and naturalness." This aesthetic of simplicity and naturalness gradually became the core philosophy of her designs. In 1914, the First World War broke out. The Parisian fashion industry was thrown into chaos. A life of luxury suddenly seemed inappropriate and out of touch. Women needed more practical clothing to adapt to wartime life. For Coco, this was a monumental opportunity. Her simple, practical style perfectly matched the needs of the time. But the war also brought personal anguish. Boy was sent to the front lines as an officer, and their time together became uncertain. During Boy's absence, Coco poured all her energy into her work. She hired more seamstresses, expanded her production, and began designing entire women's wear collections. In 1916, she introduced a suit made from jersey fabric. This material had previously been used only for men's underwear, but Coco transformed into an elegant jacket and skirt for women. The suit had no corset, clean lines, was comfortable to wear, and was significantly cheaper than traditional silk ensembles. Most importantly, it was perfectly suited to the new roles women were taking on during the war. They needed to work, but they also wanted to remain elegant. Vogue magazine wrote, "Madame Chanel has created a new kind of elegance, one that relies not on ornamentation, but on clean lines in perfect proportion." By the end of the war in 1918, Coco Chanel was firmly established as a major force in Parisian fashion. Her clientele included Russian princesses, British aristocrats, and the wives of American tycoons. But the news that brought her the most joy was that Boy was finally coming home. In December 1919, Boy wrote to Coco, telling her he was returning to Paris, and they could finally begin their life together. Coco was ecstatic, preparing for their reunion. She designed a special dress for herself, planning to wear it on the day he returned. But on December 22, 1919, what arrived was not her beloved, but a piece of news that shattered her world. Boy Capel had been killed in a car accident on his way back to Paris. In that moment, Chanel's universe collapsed. She canceled all her colorful designs. With her own hands, she sewed herself one black dress after another. In an era when women only wore color, she walked the streets of Paris day after day, a moving monument cloaked in black. Onlookers saw rebellion. What they didn't see was that this black was her only armor, her silent declaration of a grief too profound for words. This was not yet the iconic little black dress of fashion fame. This was a purely personal expression of sorrow. But it was through this long period of mourning that she came to fully understand the power of black. It was not resignation, it was authority. It was not an end, it was eternity. This experience would infuse the soul of the little black dress, born a few years later with its profound meaning. Grief did not destroy her. It led her to the very cornerstone of her design philosophy. From that day forward, Coco was more than a fashion designer. She was an artist who used design to express emotion, a philosopher who used fashion to convey a new way of life, and her empire was about to enter its most glorious age. Chapter 4: Birth of a Legend, Philosophy of an Icon. 1920, 31 Rue Cambon, Paris. Coco Chanel stood in her newly expanded flagship boutique, watching her clients, all dressed in her little black dresses. A year earlier, this design born of sorrow had become the most sought-after fashion item in Paris. But Coco knew she wanted more than temporary success. She was on a mission to create a timeless style. "I don't do fashion," she told an assistant. "I am fashion." In 1921, Chanel decided to create a unique perfume that would be hers alone. She sought out Ernest Bose, a perfumer who had once worked for the court of the Russian Tsar. After months of creation, Bose presented her with his work, not one, but two sets of samples, numbered 1 through 5 and 20 through 24. Chanel didn't ask for any descriptions. She methodically smelled each one. When she reached sample number 5, she stopped. This was it. It was an abstract, unprecedented scent, the scent of a woman. "What will you name it?" Bose asked. "I will keep the name of this sample number 5, Chanel replied. "I present my dress collections on the 5th of May, the 5th month of the year, so number 5 will bring it good luck." This was anything but a casual choice. Chanel was deeply superstitious, and the number 5 was her talisman. Her astrological sign was Leo, the 5th sign of the zodiac. She felt an almost mystical connection to the number. She didn't simply name the perfume number 5, she chose number 5, deciding that this cold, mysterious numerical designation would be the name of her first fragrance. In an age when perfumes were named Lover's Kiss or Garden of Spring, to name a luxury fragrance with a simple digit was a radical act of subversion. It was clean, direct, powerful, and tinged with a sense of mysterious fate. The creation of Chanel number 5 was, in itself, a revolution. At a time when single-note floral scents were the norm, it used over 80 ingredients, including for the first time a significant quantity of aldehydes, a synthetic component that created an abstract, complex, and utterly undefinable scent of a woman. Its bottle design was equally disruptive. While other perfumes were housed in ornate, elaborate crystal flacons, Chanel did the exact opposite. She chose a minimalist, square glass bottle reminiscent of a whiskey decanter. But what truly made it legendary was Chanel's marketing strategy, a masterclass in viral promotion before the term even existed. She ran no traditional advertisements. Instead, she orchestrated a brilliant word-of-mouth campaign. She invited a group of influential friends to dine at the most exclusive restaurant on the French Riviera. During the dinner, she casually spritzed the air around her table with number 5. The affect was magical. Every elegant woman who passed their table stopped, captivated by this intoxicating, unheard-of scent, and asked, "What is that incredible fragrance?" Before the perfume was even officially for sale, Chanel had manufactured immense desire and mystery within the most elite social circles of Paris. When number 5 finally appeared in her Rue Cambon boutique, it was never positioned as an accessible product. On the contrary, it was an expensive, aspirational luxury. And that was the true secret to its success. Chanel wasn't selling a product, she was selling an attainable dream. A woman who couldn't yet afford a Chanel suit could buy a bottle of number 5 and gain entry into the world of Chanel. It was never cheap, but for the first time, it made the dream of luxury feel within reach. This positioning remains the gold standard for virtually every luxury brand to this day. But Coco's ambition didn't stop there. In 1925, she introduced the Chanel suit, the classic tweed ensemble with its clean lines and no corset, designed to be worn from morning until night. "Why can't women dress as comfortably as men?" she asked in an interview with Harper's Bazaar. "Why must elegance be painful?" The success of the suit cemented Coco's status as a fashion titan. But more importantly, it embodied her core design philosophy: fashion must serve life, not constrict it. In 1929, the Great Depression hit the global economy. Many luxury brands struggled and failed, but Chanel's business grew. The reason was simple. In times of economic hardship, people crave practical, timeless elegance, and that was Chanel's specialty. The opposite of luxury is not poverty, Coco famously said. It is vulgarity. This philosophy allowed Chanel not only to survive the Depression, but to expand her market share. But Coco's greatest achievement was perhaps her impact on the status of women. Before her, women's fashion was designed primarily to please the male gaze. Corsets, crinolines, elaborate decorations, all were intended to conform to a masculine ideal of female beauty. Coco proposed a revolutionary idea. Women should dress for themselves. Fashion fades, she declared. Only style remains the same. A woman's style, she believed, should come from within, not from external adornments. Her clothes gave women a new kind of freedom, the freedom to work, to be active, to live independent lives. In the 1930s, Chanel's fame crossed the Atlantic to the burgeoning film capital of Hollywood. Movie mogul Samuel Goldwyn offered her a fortune to design costumes for his leading actresses. This highly publicized collaboration, however, ended in what could be called an elegant failure. Chanel's style was rooted in the understated elegance of real life, designed to serve the woman wearing it, but the silver screen demanded exaggeration, fantasy, and bold visual impact. Her sophisticated designs looked too real, too simple, under the harsh lights of a film set. They couldn't fulfill the dream-making needs of Hollywood. The experience reinforced Chanel's conviction about her own path. Her battlefield was the real world. Her muse was the independent modern woman, not a fictional screen goddess. She wasn't changed by the commercial tides of Hollywood. This failure was, in fact, the ultimate proof of how unique and unwavering her vision truly was. However, just as Chanel's fame reached its zenith, the shadow of the Second World War fell over Europe. This period would become the darkest, most complex, and for many, the most unforgivable chapter of her life. In 1940, when the German army occupied Paris, Chanel closed her fashion house. But she did not flee. She remained, living at the Hotel Ritz, which had become a headquarters for high-ranking German officers. Here, she did more than just begin a love affair with a German officer named Baron Hans Gunther von Dinklich. The truth was far more complex than a simple romance. Her lover was a high-level Gestapo spy. Declassified archives have since revealed that Chanel herself was registered as an agent with German military intelligence, Abwehr, under the code name F7124, Westminster. She even participated in a secret mission, codenamed Operation Model Hat, attempting to use her old social connections to Winston Churchill to broker a separate peace between Germany and Britain. Even more damning, she actively tried to use the Nazis' Aryanization laws to wrest full control of the Chanel No. 5 perfume business from her Jewish partners, the Wertheimer family. Fortunately, the Wertheimers had anticipated the danger and had already transferred ownership of the company to a non-Jewish associate in America. After the war, Chanel was arrested for collaboration but was released shortly after. Many historians believe her old friend Winston Churchill intervened on her behalf. She was exiled to Switzerland, where she remained for nearly a decade. She never publicly atoned for her actions during this period, insisting only that she did what she had to do to survive. Was she a ruthless opportunist who would do anything for success? Or a complex woman who made terrible choices in a world gone mad? History offers no simple answer. But this is the key to truly decoding Chanel. She was the ultimate pragmatist. To survive and protect her empire, she would operate at the very edge of any rule, be it moral or legal. Her purity and her stains together form the complete picture of this unparalleled legend. After nearly a decade in exile in 1954, a 71-year-old Chanel decided to return to Paris, the fashion capital she had once ruled. But the city had moved on. It was now in the thrall of Christian Dior's new look, a style that celebrated corseted waists and voluminous, extravagant skirts. Chanel's comeback show was not met with applause. It was a catastrophe. The French press was merciless, mocking her designs as relics of the 1950s, a pitiful failure. For a moment, it seemed as if Paris had abandoned her all over again. But just when everyone thought her career was finally over, a miracle happened across the Atlantic. The American press and buyers reacted with overwhelming enthusiasm. For American women who had experienced the war and were now entering the workforce in unprecedented numbers, Dior's opulence felt like a step backward. Chanel's simplicity, comfort, and practicality represented the future. History proves she wasn't out of date. Once again, she was more than half a step ahead of her own countrymen. This breathtaking, come-from-behind victory truly cemented her unshakable legendary status. Building on this momentum, she launched the Chanel 2.55 handbag in the iconic two-tone slingback shoes. Her tweed suit became a global phenomenon once more, the ultimate symbol of power and elegance. In 1971, at the age of 87, Coco Chanel died in her suite at the Ritz Hotel, concluding her epic life. Looking back, we can clearly see the code to her success. It can be summarized in the phrases she lived by. I don't create fashion. I am fashion. Elegance is refusal. Fashion fades, but style is eternal. But most importantly, she proved a fundamental truth. True uniqueness isn't about fighting the world. It's about creating a better version of yourself that the world must eventually accept. This is the most precious legacy Coco Chanel left us. In any era, if you hold fast to your authentic self, the world will eventually make way for you. Today, if you walk down the Rue Cambon in Paris, you will still see her flagship store shining brightly. The customers inside, wearing their little black dresses, carrying their 2.55 handbags, and spritzing Chanel No. 5, may not know the full story behind these creations, but they are all living extensions of Coco Chanel's philosophy. Simplicity is beauty. Freedom is elegance. Authenticity is power. This was Chanel, a woman who spent her life teaching the world the true meaning of being an icon. Decoding Chanel's life reveals her clear formula for success. A core mindset, the law of attraction. Position yourself in the center of possibility. Chanel rarely chased. She demonstrated her unique value and drew others to her. From the convent to the castle, from Moulins to Paris, she always found a way to position herself for the next opportunity. 3 key practices. First, mirroring, creating a sense of rapport. When Chanel wore simplified riding clothes to ride with men or her own plain hats to society gatherings, these weren't just fashion choices. They were subconscious signals that she was, in some way, one of them, while still being utterly herself. Second, anticipating the zeitgeist, staying half a step ahead. None of Chanel's innovations came from a vacuum. She had an uncanny ability to sense the shifts in society, the practicality needed during World War I, the desire for freedom after, and provide the solution just before people knew they needed it. Finally, embodying emotion, translating feelings into tangible form. From the little black dress born of heartbreak to the 2.55 handbag designed for a woman on the move, Chanel infused her creations with powerful, relatable emotions. Each product told a story. So, what does it truly mean to be a maverick? It's not about a rebellious posture, strange clothes, or being different for the sake of being different. Chanel's life teaches us that true, lasting uniqueness comes from finding your most authentic self and then using every ounce of your talent, ambition, resilience, and even your pain to nurture it until it grows into a towering tree that no one can ignore. It means that when the world doesn't understand you, you have the courage to persist. And when the world casts you out, you have the audacity to come back. May you, like Chanel, find the grace to live as your true self in this complex world. Because the highest form of rebellion isn't about fitting in or even fighting back. It's about becoming so powerful in your own authenticity that you make the world adapt to you. I'm Fanko, and this has been Fanko Decodes. If Chanel's story has given you strength, don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll decode another legend next time.